Thank you for the nice introduction, Shahin. Today I'll present our paper on borrowed time. In this work we propose a new countermeasure for preventing static side channel analysis. And this work was a collaboration between the University of Adelaide, Ruhr University Bochum, UC Louvain, and the Australian Department of Defence. So whenever we perform any computation, we inevitably invoke some physical process. And that means that the hardware that we execute on will interact with its environment in a number of ways. It'll draw some power, it might heat up, make some noise, and moving charges within might interact with the surrounding EM fields. And so physical side channel analysis is the practice of using these observations in order to make inferences as to the data being stored inside a chip and the computations taking place. And it's particularly security relevant because it violates the black box model or black box assumption, which upholds the security of things like cryptographic primitives, for example. And of all of these physical side channels, power has historically had the most focus in literature because it's the most information rich of these side channels. And that's what I'll focus on here on. So we have a basic circuit model here. The power consumed by a chip is made up of two distinct components. On one hand, there's static power used in maintaining a circuit state. So in this case, the states of the registers, we have a bit of an interruption, a bit of a showstopper. Yeah. So static and dynamic power. Static, the power consumed in retaining a circuit state, powering signal lines. So in this instance, we have some high voltage signals representing ones shown in red, low voltage zeros shown in blue. And the dynamic power consumption comes upon switching at the transitions between states. So, and this is stimulated by an active clock edge arriving at the registers. So in this situation, the registers in the top row will update upon the arrival of the active clock edge. And you'll see that the changes from the top left register propagate their way to the end of the combinatorial path. So if you were to monitor the power consumption of this circuit, it would look something like this. So right around the active clock edges, the rising edge, when the clock goes from 0 to 1, you see a big spike in activity. And this comes from all of that switching behavior. And so generally, most power analysis work has been dynamic power analysis. And this involves sampling at a very high frequency right around these active edges, and you capture a whole lot of information about the transitions or the switches of all those internal circuit elements. An attack model with relatively less attention historically, but is gaining a bit more traction nowadays, is static. This static threat model involves an attacker which is able to induce some kind of a static state in the circuit, typically by halting the clock signal provided to the circuit. And so what they'll do is they'll stop the clock signal, they'll wait a certain amount of time for the dynamic effects from the last transition to subside before they then take a measurement over a long period of time and average that down into a single value. And that single value is a very clean, noise-free representation of that circuit state. And so one of the first questions we ask when trying to design a countermeasure against this class of side channel attack is, okay, well, does the adversary necessarily need to stop the clock? Can they not attack within the end of the period after this signal has reached the end of its path? Or if that's not the case, then for how long does the adversary need to stop the clock? So to answer this, we ran a case study. We performed static CPA, correlation power analysis, against an FPGA implementation of AES. This implementation was purposefully very leaky, no side channel countermeasures in place. And as in past literature, we use a 20 millisecond wait time, so that's the time before we start taking measurements, along with a 20 millisecond window length across which we average. And with this, we baseline the level of leakage in the system, and we find that we can perform a full key recovery with roughly 1,500 MTD, that's measurements to disclosure. And that's what's shown. The diagram on the right there shows the recovery of a single subkey, so that's 1 byte. Each line effectively represents one of 256 candidate key guesses, the correlation of their expected power consumption along with what we observe, and we find that indeed the correct key candidate emerges quite early after 1,000 or so traces with very high correlation. So in order to investigate how soon after the last active edge we can attack, we progressively reduce the offset and the window length until we find that at about 200 microseconds offset, for over 1 million traces, we see absolutely no leakage. So we pick this as a cutoff because it's 3 orders of magnitude more than the baseline leakage scenario. And so this will motivate or help us evaluate our countermeasure as well. It'll tie in. So in designing a countermeasure, we observe that all past, oh, we have another very loud interruption. Yeah. So we observe that all past attacks that use this attack model rely on 2 conditions holding. The clock provided to the target circuit must be stopped, and sensitive content must remain in registers and unchanged. So we proposed a rather intuitive and simple countermeasure approach. We want to prevent situations in which both of these conditions hold. And we want to do this with circuitry that we can build into a chip directly alongside the target. So our countermeasure, borrowed time, the first thing it does is it's able to detect when the clock is stopped by the absence of a pulse or a drop there. And then upon detecting this, it then performs a clear of sensitive registers by overriding their values with randomness. So we actually created 2 variants of our countermeasure, one of which is based on a phase lock loop, a PLL. This is circuitry that's commonly found within clock management circuitry. And our other solution, each of these are better suited to different deployment scenarios. Our other solution is based on some custom asynchronous circuitry, which is very well suited for lightweight systems that consume low power, low circuit area. And in the interest of time today, I'll focus on the latter of these 2 solutions. So we'll step through our design bit by bit. We have our target circuit here. And we've identified a bunch of sensitive registers. If this is a crypto system, this might be registers that store some key-dependent material at any point in execution. It receives an external clock. First thing we want to do is monitor this clock. So we have a clock sensor circuit here. The clock sensor circuit takes in the clock signal and passes it through a chain of delay elements. So every delay element will take the same signal, time shift it, and you'll create another tap on this delay chain. So on the right here, we've got a timing diagram that shows 3 of these taps. And why just during my talk? Jeez.
It's sensitive.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're good. So all of these taps are time-shifted versions of the clock, and if we feed them all into a combinatorial element, then this element can effectively sample the clock at different points in time. And if it sees variation in the clock signal, so if you imagine drawing a vertical line across when the clock is indeed ticking, you'll see that the values are different. It will let everything work fine. It won't trigger an alarm or anything. As soon as the clock is stopped, it'll trigger the alarm signal, stop detect in this case. Now, the next thing we need is some circuitry to overwrite those registers. So we actually will have to interrupt the register inputs and put in our state reset circuitry. So we do still pass the original register inputs through to the registers, but we multiplex the input between either that or randomness from a random number generator. And that's selected based on whether the alarm has been triggered or not. So we can see that on the timing diagram on the right, stop detect goes high, the register input changes from sensitive data to our randomness, but the registers still haven't latched this change. As we can see, the register output is still the sensitive data. And the reason for this is that we don't have a transitioning clock signal, so we don't have anything to latch these new values in. So the next thing we need to add in is a clock edge generator. Now, we use another dedicated clock multiplexer for this. We again feed in the original clock as the first option. This is creating system clock, which is at the bottom of our timing diagram in this case. And then alternatively, as the other option, we feed in a delayed version of the alarm signal, because we know that as soon as the alarm signal is asserted, well, we have a guaranteed low to high transition there, which we can then also use as the active clock edge. So we delay, stop, detect, and feed that in as the clock, creating system clock. And we see that with the last pulse in system clock, the register output is updated and the registers are cleared securely. And so we can actually, we can tune this circuit and play around with it, but overall, we're able to detect a stopped clock within 1 clock cycle period. So assuming that the target operates in the megahertz range, borrowed time can clear registers within, at worst, 1 microsecond, which is well before we're able to observe any static leakage, at least as per our past experiments. So we evaluate our countermeasure, again, trying to mount the attacks with varying time windows and offsets. Again, without the countermeasure, the very leaky system, with borrowed time, we find no emergence of the correct key candidates for millions of traces. So to summarize, we propose a new flexible in-chip countermeasure to protect against the class of static side channel analysis. Some more details that I didn't have time to go over today, but this system can be tuned to allow for operation across a given frequency range. It's not tied to a certain frequency. So if you have a dynamic target you want to build there, then that can work as well. I'm almost finished. Let me finish. Okay. And the system is also resilient to clock glitching. The system enables safe operation inside a clock-gated system. So that lets you still reap the benefits of power savings through clock gating, which is a common design practice. And we also include some overhead analysis and find that our countermeasure is quite modest in terms of how much overhead it has, especially with respect to other state-of-the-art countermeasures. If you'd like to know more information about our countermeasure or these attacks and how they work, we invite you to read our paper. We also make our code artifacts open source. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Robert. Your talk was so attractive that people were flying in from all over the world to listen to that. Any questions? So maybe I ask the first question. Did you make any assumptions about the random number generator in your circuit? Like, does it need a clock? Does it need the same clock? Or is it just some pre-generated random numbers that you store on the chip?
Yeah, so we make sure that the RNG can actually work with the same clock that gets stopped, because we made sure that it produces enough fresh randomness to be able to clear the whole, all the sensitive registers at any given moment.
I see. Next question.
Hey, Robbie, excellent talk. I think you handled all the interruptions very well. My question was about how much cost does this add to a circuit if you were to add some of these like precautionary bits that you've proposed? Is it relatively simple and therefore pretty cheap, or? Yeah,
good question. So the overhead in terms of power, for instance, for a very lightweight AES circuit, like the one that we used in the case study, lightweight meaning no other side channel protections in place to add their own overhead, added like 20% power overhead, for example. Whereas other state-of-the-art countermeasures like masking might add like 200 or 300%.
But also as far as like financial cost of like individual parts that would have to go on a circuit probably wouldn't be too bad considering it was relatively simple, I imagine. Yeah, probably it uses a fair bit of circuit area. You can play around with, like, for instance, we didn't have to use every single, the taps between every single element. We bunched together elements and you could replace those with, say, a very long routed signal, but maybe that consumes more power, less circuitry area. There's a lot of trade-offs that you can do in designing there. Yeah, it's a balance. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have time for one more question. If not, okay, great. Thank you. Let's thank Robert again.